On a cool morning, the streets were quiet and still. Shops had just begun to open, and a soft mist rolled along the sidewalks. A lone German shepherd walked slowly past the bakery, his paws leaving faint prints on the damp ground. His fur was rough and dirty, a mix of tan and black that used to shine when he had an owner. Now it looked dull and tangled. Around his neck hung an old worn collar with no name tag, only a faded mark where one had once been. He was thin and his ribs could be seen when he moved, but his eyes, soft, brown, and full of longing, showed something no one noticed at first glance. He was kind, patient, and waiting for something, or someone. He had no name that anyone knew. The people in the town just called him that stray dog. Some shopkeepers would toss him old bread or leftover meat, while others shouted at him to go away. He never barked or growled. He only walked away quietly, his tail low but not angry. It was as if he understood humans well enough to forgive their coldness. Every day he followed the same path, from the bakery, past the park, along the narrow street lined with small houses, and back again. He had learned to survive, finding bits of food near garbage bins and clean water from the small fountain in the park. At night he slept behind an old bookstore curling up near the warm air vent. Sometimes children saw him and pointed excitedly, saying he looked like a police dog. But no one ever stopped long enough to pet him. That morning the world felt quieter than usual. The dog's ears twitched as he heard distant sounds, a bus stopping, a man talking on the phone, the faint laughter of children going to school. He followed the sound, sniffing the air. There was something different in the wind, not the smell of food or people, but something else. Something faint and worrying. As he turned a corner near the park, his nose lifted. He stopped walking. His muscles stiffened. There was a smell he could not ignore. It was fear, sweat, and a strange, sharp scent that made him uneasy. He began to walk faster, his paws clicking softly on the pavement. Then he saw her. On the edge of the sidewalk, near a low wall, a little girl was lying still. She looked no older than 6 or 7. Her small body was dressed in a pink coat, her backpack torn open beside her. Crayons and papers were scattered on the ground as if she had fallen hard. One of her shoes was missing, lying a few feet away. Her hair was tied with small ribbons, but now it was messy and covered with dust. The dog froze for a moment, watching her. His head tilted slightly, his tail lifted halfway, unsure. She wasn't moving. He stepped closer, his nose twitching. There was no sign of anyone around. Cars passed at a distance, but no one looked this way. He sniffed her small hand, then her face. Her skin was cold. He whined softly and nudged her arm with his nose. Still no response. He circled her, anxious, then pawed lightly at her shoulder. His heart raced, even though he didn't understand why. He barked once, a sharp sound that echoed against the nearby walls, but no one came. For a moment he sat beside her, confused. Then something deep inside him moved. A memory, perhaps, from a time long ago when he had a family, when he protected a child who looked just like this one. He let out another bark, louder this time. His tail stiffened, his ears pricked up. He barked again and again, the sound breaking the silence of the morning. Still no one came. The dog whimpered and looked around. Then, in a moment that showed pure instinct, he lay down beside the girl. He pressed his warm body close to hers, curling slightly to shield her from the cold breeze. He could feel her shallow breathing against his side. His own body heat began to warm her skin. Every few seconds he lifted his head to look around, hoping to see someone. Minutes passed slowly. A delivery truck rumbled by. A man walked past the other side of the street, too busy with his phone to notice. The dog gave a short bark, then a long one, but the man didn't turn. He licked the girl's cheek softly, his nose touching her cold skin. His eyes were full of worry. Finally, an old woman came walking down the street carrying a small grocery bag. The dog saw her and jumped up. He barked, ran a few steps toward her, then back to the girl. The woman stopped, startled. She looked around, unsure why the dog was acting like that. He barked again, ran around in circles, and then stood beside the girl, looking at the woman as if begging her to come. Curiosity and concern made the woman step closer. "What is it, boy?" she said softly. When she saw the little girl lying motionless, her eyes widened. The grocery bag fell from her hands as she rushed forward. She knelt beside the girl and touched her forehead. "Oh, dear," she whispered, realizing the child was barely breathing. The dog barked once more and then sat close, watching her movements. The woman quickly pulled out her phone and called for help, her voice shaking as she gave the location. While she waited for the ambulance, she took off her scarf and placed it over the girl's chest. The German Shepherd kept his head low beside her, his eyes never leaving the child. The woman noticed how carefully he stayed near the girl, not moving even when she spoke to him. He didn't seem like an ordinary stray. There was something protective about the way he sat, alert, gentle, and loyal. She reached out a trembling hand and touched his head. "You're a good boy," she said softly. "You did the right thing." The distant sound of sirens filled the air. The dog's ears lifted again, and he stood up, glancing between the girl and the road. His tail wagged slightly, unsure but hopeful. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics rushed over. They checked the girl, carefully lifting her onto a stretcher. The dog followed every movement, whining softly as they placed her in the vehicle. One of the paramedics turned to the woman. "Did you call it in?" "Yes," she said. But it was the dog who found her first. He wouldn't leave her side. The man looked at the dog, surprised. "Smart one, huh?" he said. The dog tried to jump into the ambulance, but they gently closed the door. He stood there watching as the lights flashed and the siren grew louder, carrying the little girl away. He didn't chase the vehicle. He just sat down in the middle of the street, head tilted, ears low. The woman felt tears rise in her eyes as she watched the lonely dog stare after the ambulance. For a long time after it was gone, he stayed in that same spot, as if waiting for the girl to return. People passed by, but he didn't move. He only lowered his head slowly, resting it on his paws while the morning light grew brighter around him. He didn't know it yet, but his act of love had just changed both their lives forever. The sound of sirens faded as the ambulance turned the corner and disappeared. The stray German Shepherd stood in the same place for a while, his tail still, his eyes watching the street where the vehicle had gone. The woman who had called for help tried to pet him again, but he only looked at her quietly, then slowly walked away. His steps were heavy, almost like he was unsure of what to do next. He went back toward the bakery, the same place where he often found scraps of bread. But today he didn't care about food. Something in him felt different. He kept turning his head toward the road, as if expecting the ambulance to return. The dog lay down near the park bench and placed his head between his paws. Around him, life moved on. Children ran by holding balloons, people talked, and cars passed. But he stayed still. He could still smell the faint scent of the little girl on his fur, that small, innocent smell that reminded him of someone he once knew. Maybe it was a memory of a time when he had a home, when a child like her used to hug him and feed him pieces of bread. He could not remember clearly, but his heart knew that feeling well. Hours passed and the sun began to sink. A few people stopped near him and whispered about the dog who had saved the girl. Word had started to spread through the neighborhood. Someone had filmed him barking beside the unconscious child, and the video was already being shared on local phones and social pages. People called him the hero dog, but the dog didn't know any of that. He just kept waiting. That night he went to the empty alley where he often slept. The air was cold, but he didn't curl up to sleep. He lay there awake, his ears twitching at every sound. Every time he heard an engine or a siren far away, he stood up suddenly, tail wagging for a moment, hoping it was the ambulance coming back. But it never did. Meanwhile, in the hospital, the little girl was in a room filled with soft light. Her parents sat beside her, holding her small hands. Her name was Emily. The doctors said she had suffered a sudden seizure on her way home from school, possibly caused by a condition her parents never knew about. "She's lucky," the doctor said gently. "If someone hadn't found her in time, things could have been much worse. That dog saved her life." Emily's mother wiped her tears, whispering a quiet prayer of thanks. "What dog?" she asked. The nurse showed her the video someone had shared online. The image of the dirty German Shepherd lying beside her daughter made the woman cover her mouth in shock. "He stayed with her," she said softly. "He didn't leave her alone." Her husband nodded, still in disbelief. "We need to find that dog," he said. "He deserves more than a street." The next day, animal rescue volunteers began searching the area where the girl was found. They walked through the park, the alley, and around the bakery, asking if anyone had seen the stray. Some people pointed to where he usually slept. Others said they saw him following the ambulance the day before until it disappeared from sight. By evening, the volunteers found him near the park again. He was sitting under a tree watching the road. When they approached, he didn't bark or growl. He only stood up and wagged his tail slightly as if hoping they were bringing the girl back. One of the volunteers crouched down slowly and held out a piece of chicken. "Hey boy," she said softly. "You've done something amazing." The dog sniffed the food but didn't take it right away. He looked at her face, then at the empty street behind her. After a long pause, he carefully took the food and ate it. His eyes still looked tired and sad. The volunteers placed a leash gently around his neck, and he didn't resist. He just followed them quietly to the van, his paws dragging slightly as if each step took effort. They took him to the animal shelter nearby, cleaned his fur, and gave him a warm bed and fresh food. For the first time in months, he slept deeply, but even in his sleep he would sometimes twitch and whine softly, as if dreaming of the little girl on the cold sidewalk. Back at the hospital, Emily slowly opened her eyes. The bright light made her blink. She saw her parents leaning over her, crying with relief. Her voice was weak when she whispered, "Papa?" Her father smiled and held her hand tightly. "You're safe now, sweetheart. You're okay." After a moment, she looked around the room. "Where's my dog?" she asked. "The one who was with me." Her parents glanced at each other. "Dog?" her mother asked gently. "The big one," Emily said. "He stayed with me. He kept me warm." Tears filled her eyes as she spoke. "He didn't leave me." Her mother brushed her hair softly. "We're going to find him, darling," she promised. The next morning, the story appeared in the local news. Reporters called it "Stray Dog Becomes Guardian Angel." The article described how the German Shepherd had protected an unconscious girl until help arrived. Pictures of him from the video spread quickly, and people began visiting the shelter to see him. Some brought toys, others food, and many simply wanted to meet the dog who had done something so selfless. The volunteers named him Guardian, after the nickname that spread online. But the dog still seemed distant, quiet. He wagged his tail politely when people came, but his eyes always turned toward the door as if he was still waiting for someone specific. That evening, Emily's parents came to the shelter. When they entered, Guardian lifted his head immediately. He didn't bark, but his body stiffened. He smelled something familiar. The scent of the little girl lingered faintly on their clothes. "Is that him?" Emily's mother asked softly, and the volunteer nodded. "Yes," she said. "He hasn't been eating much, but he seems gentle and calm." Emily's father stepped closer. "Hey, buddy," he said quietly. The dog's tail gave a small wag, his eyes brightening for the first time in days. The man knelt down, offering his hand for the dog to sniff. Guardian pressed his nose into his palm, as if recognizing the same comforting scent that had surrounded the girl in the hospital bed. "He remembers," the volunteer whispered, smiling through tears. The parents took pictures and sent them to Emily, who was still recovering. When she saw the photo, her face lit up. "That's him. That's my dog," she said excitedly. "Can we bring him home, please?" Her parents looked at each other and knew they didn't have a choice. The next morning, when they came back to the shelter with Emily in a wheelchair, the entire staff watched silently. Guardian saw her the moment she entered. His ears perked up and he walked slowly toward her. Then, as if realizing who she was, he broke into a run, his tail wagging wildly. He stopped right in front of her and gently placed his paws on the edge of her chair, licking her hand. Emily began to cry softly, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You came back," she whispered. "You really came back." Everyone in the room was quiet, some wiping tears from their eyes. The dog rested his head on her lap, closing his eyes with relief. It was as if he finally understood that he didn't have to wait anymore. The little girl he had protected was safe, and now he was home again. That night, Guardian lay on a warm rug beside Emily's bed. She reached down and patted his head, whispering, "You saved me. Now I'll take care of you forever." The dog gave a small sigh, his tail thumping softly against the floor. Outside, the world continued as usual. Cars passing, lights glowing. People living their lives, but inside that little room, a stray dog and a little girl slept peacefully, their bond unspoken but unbreakable. The streets that once felt cold and lonely had finally led him home. The morning sunlight shone softly through the curtains in Emily's room. The little girl was sitting up in bed, her cheeks no longer pale, a faint smile on her face. Beside her, on the rug, the German Shepherd lay peacefully, his eyes half closed. Every now and then, he would lift his head to check on her, making sure she was still there. His fur was clean now, brushed smooth by Emily's mother. Around his neck was a new collar, shiny and red, with a small tag that said Guardian. Emily's father stood by the door, watching the scene quietly. It was hard for him to believe that just a week ago, this same dog had been wandering the streets thin and cold, searching for food. Now he looked strong and proud again, as if he knew he had a purpose. The family had decided to keep him, and no one in the house had any doubts about it. Guardian had saved their daughter's life, and in return they wanted to give him a new one. When Emily went downstairs for breakfast, Guardian followed closely behind her, his tail wagging gently. He stayed at her side, careful not to trip her small feet. Her mother placed a bowl of cereal in front of her, and a separate bowl of cooked chicken for the dog. "You're really spoiling him," her father joked softly. Her mother smiled. "He deserves it." After breakfast, Emily sat on the porch steps, running her fingers through Guardian's fur. The air smelled of fresh grass and sunshine. "You're not a stray anymore," she whispered to him. The dog tilted his head, watching her with soft eyes, as if he understood every word. He licked her hand, making her giggle. As days went by, their bond grew stronger. Guardian followed Emily everywhere. When she played in the yard, he stood nearby, keeping watch. When she napped, he lay beside her bed, his ears alert for any sound. At night, he would walk around the house before lying down, as if checking that everyone was safe. He didn't bark much, only when someone strange came close to the gate. The family felt safer with him around. One afternoon, Emily's parents took her for a short walk to the park. Guardian walked beside them, a leash loosely around his neck. People who passed by smiled and pointed. Some recognized him from the video that had gone viral. "That's the hero dog," one woman said. "He's even more beautiful in real life." Another person took a photo and said they were glad to see him doing well. Emily smiled proudly. "He's my best friend," she said, hugging his neck. At the park, children ran up to pet him. Guardian was calm and gentle, letting small hands touch his fur. He wagged his tail and licked one boy's fingers, making them laugh. Emily's parents watched from a bench, their hearts full. Seeing their daughter happy again after such a frightening time was more than they could ask for. But that day also brought something unexpected. A man approached them slowly, holding a small notebook. He looked around 60 with gray hair and kind eyes. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Is that your dog?" Emily's father nodded. "Yes, we adopted him recently." The man smiled sadly. "I think I know him. Or at least I used to." The family looked surprised. Emily's mother asked gently, "You knew Guardian?" The man knelt down in front of the dog. "Rex," he said quietly. The dog's ears twitched. "That was your name, wasn't it?" Guardian tilted his head and sniffed the man's hand. There was a moment of silence. Then the dog stepped closer and pressed his nose against the man's palm. The man's eyes filled with tears. "You remember me, don't you?" he whispered. "I'm so sorry, boy." He explained that he had been a retired police officer and that Rex had been his partner. The dog had once been trained as a rescue animal, helping to find missing people. But after the man's wife became sick, he couldn't take care of Rex properly. One day during a storm, Rex had run off when the fence broke and the man never found him again. "I looked for weeks," he said, his voice trembling. "I thought he was gone forever." Emily's parents were silent, not knowing what to say. Emily looked at Guardian and then at the man. "He's my guardian now," she said softly, holding the dog's collar. "But maybe he was your hero before." The man smiled through tears. "He's always been a hero." He stroked Guardian's head one last time. "I'm glad he found someone who needs him as much as he needs them." Then he stood up and nodded. "Take care of him. He's special." As the man walked away, Guardian watched him for a long time, his tail still. Then he turned and looked at Emily, gently placing his head in her lap. She wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll never let you go." The days that followed were filled with small, peaceful moments. Guardian became part of the family completely. He learned their routine. When Emily left for school, when her parents came home, when it was dinner time, he would wait by the window every afternoon until he saw Emily's yellow school bus stop at the corner. As soon as she stepped off, his tail started wagging like crazy. One rainy afternoon, Emily slipped on the wet porch steps, and before she could fall, Guardian jumped forward, blocking her fall with his body. She landed safely against his fur, laughing nervously. Her mother rushed out, startled. "Oh my goodness. Are you okay?" Emily nodded, hugging Guardian. "He saved me again," she said proudly. Her mother smiled through tears. "Looks like he really is your guardian angel." The story of the dog who once saved a little girl continued to spread. Reporters came to interview the family, but Emily's parents always said the same thing. "We didn't rescue him. He rescued us." One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Emily sat on the porch with her father. Guardian lay at their feet, watching the horizon. "Papa," she said softly, "do you think God sent him?" Her father looked at her and smiled. "I think sometimes God uses special messengers. Maybe Guardian was meant to find you." Emily reached down and patted his head. "Then I'm never letting him go," she whispered. Her father nodded. "He doesn't want to go anywhere. He's home." As the stars began to appear, the little girl leaned against her father's shoulder while Guardian stretched out beside them. The soft sound of crickets filled the air. The once lonely stray who had roamed cold streets now had a family, a warm home, and a little girl who loved him more than anything. And though he couldn't speak, his eyes said it all in gratitude, peace, and love. That night, Emily's mother looked into the room before turning off the lights. Emily was asleep, one hand resting on Guardian's neck. The dog opened one eye, saw her, and wagged his tail quietly as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm watching her." The mother smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you, Guardian." Then she turned off the light, leaving them both wrapped in the safe, quiet glow of a home that would never again feel empty. Outside, the night was calm. The wind blew gently through the trees, carrying the faint sound of distant laughter. In that small house, a stray dog had become a hero, a protector, and most of all, family. It had been several months since Guardian came into Emily's life, and by now no one in the neighborhood called him a stray anymore. He had become something of a local legend. People would wave when they saw him walking with Emily. Children would run to pet him, and even the baker who once chased him away now left small treats near the gate. But for Emily, he was not a hero or a story for the news. He was simply her best friend. Every morning, Emily woke early to feed him. She would mix his food with small pieces of chicken or bread, and laugh when he wagged his tail so hard the bowl slid across the floor. "Slow down, Guardian," she'd giggle. "You act like you haven't eaten in days." Then she'd hug his neck and he would gently lick her cheek, making her squeal with joy. Her parents loved watching the two together. Emily had changed since the day of her accident. She was braver now, happier and full of energy. It was as if Guardian's presence had brought her spirit back to life. Every morning when she left for school, he would walk her to the end of the driveway and wait there until her bus disappeared down the road. When she came back in the afternoon, he would run toward her with excited barks and circle her feet as if welcoming her home from a long journey. One day, the school announced a Heroes Day, where students could bring stories of real-life heroes to share. Emily raised her hand right away. "Can I bring my hero to class?" she asked. Her teacher smiled. "Of course, if your hero can come to school." That weekend, Emily and her father made a big poster about Guardian. They printed photos of the day he was found, pictures from the hospital, and a big one of him lying beside her bed. At the bottom, Emily wrote in big, colorful letters, "My hero saved my life." On the day of the event, Emily walked into school with Guardian proudly walking beside her, wearing his shiny red collar and leash. The children gasped and clapped. "It's the hero dog!" someone shouted. The teacher smiled and asked everyone to sit down. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she stood beside Guardian and took a deep breath. "This is Guardian," she began softly. "He found me when I was in trouble. I was lying on the sidewalk and no one saw me. But he did. He stayed with me until help came. He didn't even know me, but he still protected me. That's what heroes do." The classroom was silent. Even the teacher's eyes were wet. Guardian stood quietly beside her, calm and proud as if he understood every word. When Emily finished, everyone clapped loudly, and several children came to pet him. That day he became more than a story. He became a symbol of kindness and loyalty. Later that week, the local mayor invited the family to a small town ceremony. They wanted to honor Guardian with a medal for bravery. The event took place in the town square, with a small crowd gathered under a bright blue sky. Emily wore a white dress and held Guardian's leash while a reporter read the story aloud. When the mayor placed a gold medal around Guardian's neck, the crowd cheered. Cameras flashed and Emily's parents wiped tears from their eyes. Guardian didn't understand the reason for all the clapping, but he wagged his tail happily and looked up at Emily as if saying, "I'm just glad you're smiling." After the ceremony, as they walked home, Emily stopped on the bridge that overlooked the river. The sunlight reflected off the water, painting everything in soft gold. She knelt beside Guardian and whispered, "You know, everyone says you saved me, but maybe I think you also saved yourself." She smiled gently. "You found your family again, didn't you?" Guardian tilted his head, his brown eyes full of warmth. He nuzzled her arm and gave a soft bark, making her laugh. They stayed there for a long time, the wind blowing softly through their hair and fur. But one evening, a few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Emily was playing in the front yard while her parents prepared dinner. Guardian lay nearby, half asleep, when suddenly he lifted his head. His ears twitched and his nose flared. He smelled smoke. Within seconds, he was on his feet, barking loudly. Emily turned around, confused. "What is it, boy?" she asked. Her father came running out of the house. "What's wrong, Guardian?" Then he smelled it too, a faint burning smell from the kitchen. He rushed inside and saw that a cloth had fallen near the stove flame. Smoke was spreading fast. He quickly turned off the burner and threw water over the cloth. When it was over, he stepped outside, coughing but smiling with relief. "If it wasn't for Guardian, this could have gotten bad," he said, patting the dog's head. "You've done it again, hero." That night, as the family ate together, Emily looked at Guardian lying near the fireplace and said softly, "He always knows when something's wrong. Maybe he's part angel." Her mother smiled. "Maybe he is." As weeks turned into months, Guardian continued to change not just Emily's life, but the entire neighborhood's. People began leaving bowls of water outside for other stray animals. Children who were once scared of dogs started feeding them gently, remembering Guardian's kindness. The town became a little softer, a little kinder, just because one dog showed what love could do. One winter afternoon, snow began to fall. Emily ran outside, bundled in her coat and gloves. Guardian followed, his breath visible in the cold air. Together they played, throwing snowballs and running through the white yard. At one point, Emily fell backward into the snow, laughing, and Guardian immediately came running, standing protectively over her like he had that first day.
"I'm okay,"
she said, laughing. "You don't have to save me every time." But he stayed beside her anyway, his eyes full of warmth and loyalty. That evening, after a long day of playing, Emily sat by the window with Guardian beside her. Snowflakes kept falling softly and the world outside looked peaceful. She rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, "You make everything better, you know that." The dog gave a soft sigh and closed his eyes. In that moment, it was easy to forget that he had ever been a lonely stray wandering cold streets. Now he had a home, a family, and love. He was no longer searching for someone. He had found everything he needed. Sometimes, Emily's father would look at them and say, "I still can't believe how fate brought you two together." And her mother would nod quietly. "Maybe it wasn't fate," she'd say. "Maybe it was love." That night, before going to bed, Emily placed the medal the town had given Guardian on her bedside table. She smiled at him and whispered, "Good night, hero." Guardian wagged his tail once, then settled beside her bed like he always did. He didn't need words to answer her. His presence was enough. Steady, loyal, and full of quiet devotion. As the lights dimmed and the soft sound of snow continued outside, Guardian lifted his head one last time and looked at Emily, sleeping peacefully. His eyes softened and he laid his head back down, letting out a slow, content breath. In that calm winter night, a once-forgotten dog and a once-fragile girl slept side by side. Two souls who had found healing in each other, proving that sometimes love doesn't need words, only faith and kindness. The sun rose slowly over the quiet town, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Inside the small house, Guardian was the first to wake. He stretched his legs and yawned, his tail wagging softly as he looked toward the bed where Emily slept. She was curled up under her blanket, one hand resting near his head. For a moment he just watched her, listening to the calm rhythm of her breathing. Then he stood up quietly and padded toward the door, waiting patiently for the day to begin. When Emily woke up, she found him sitting near the window, watching birds outside. "Good morning, Guardian," she said, rubbing her eyes. The dog turned his head and wagged his tail gently. She got up, slipped on her slippers, and hugged him tightly. "Let's go tell Mom we're hungry." Downstairs, her mother was already in the kitchen. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, smiling. "And good morning, Guardian." She placed a bowl of food on the floor, and Guardian began eating happily while Emily poured herself cereal. It had become a warm routine. A simple start to every day that reminded them all how far they had come since that dark morning on the sidewalk months ago. Later that day, Emily and her father took Guardian to the park. The trees were starting to bloom again and the smell of spring filled the air. Children were flying kites and families were enjoying picnics. Guardian walked proudly beside Emily, his red collar shining under the sun. Wherever he went, people smiled. Some still remembered him from the story that had once touched the town. Emily stopped near the same spot where Guardian had first found her months ago. She stood there quietly for a moment, looking at the sidewalk. "This is where you saved me," she whispered. Guardian stood beside her, pressing his body against her leg as if he remembered too. "You were so brave that day," she said softly. "I think you were sent to me on purpose." Her father watched them from a short distance, his hands in his pockets. The sight of his daughter smiling and standing strong again made his heart fill with gratitude. There had been a time when he thought he might lose her, but fate had other plans, and those plans had come in the form of a stray dog with kind eyes. As the months went by, Guardian became part of every family memory. He was there when Emily celebrated her birthday, wearing a small ribbon on his collar. He was there when she learned to ride a bike, running beside her to make sure she didn't fall. And he was always there at night, lying by her bed as if standing guard against every bad dream. One summer afternoon, Emily and her parents decided to visit the beach for the first time. Guardian came along, his leash loose in her father's hand. When they reached the shore, Guardian's paws sank into the sand and he looked surprised as the waves rushed toward him. Emily laughed and splashed the water gently. "It's okay, Guardian. It's just the sea." Slowly he stepped forward, sniffed the foam, and wagged his tail before running after her along the water's edge. They spent hours playing. Emily built sandcastles while Guardian guarded them, barking at the waves whenever they came too close. Her parents took photos, Emily laughing with her arms around him, his fur wet and shining in the sunlight. Later, when they sat together watching the sunset, Emily leaned her head against Guardian's side and said, "This is the best day ever." Her mother smiled. "You know, Guardian makes everything better." Her father nodded. "He's more than a dog. He's family." As time went on, Guardian grew older. His fur began to show streaks of gray, and his steps became slower. But his eyes still had that same warmth and loyalty. Emily, now a little taller and wiser, noticed the change. She began to brush him more gently, walk slower when they went outside, and make sure his favorite blanket was always in his spot. "You took care of me," she said one evening as she petted him softly. "Now it's my turn to take care of you." Guardian licked her hand as if thanking her. Years passed, and though he aged, he never lost his spirit. On quiet evenings, Emily would still find him sitting near the porch, watching the world calmly. Sometimes she'd sit beside him, holding a cup of hot chocolate and talking about her day. "You know, Guardian," she'd say, "I still remember the day you found me. Everyone else passed by, but you stopped. I think that's what makes heroes. They don't look away." He would tilt his head and wag his tail, as if he understood every word. One autumn morning, Emily woke up to find him lying near her bed as always. But this time he didn't lift his head right away. She knelt beside him, gently touching his fur. "Hey, sleepy boy," she whispered. Slowly he opened his eyes and looked at her, his tail giving a faint wag. She smiled even as her eyes filled with tears. "You rest, okay? You've done more than enough." That day, Guardian rested peacefully. Emily stayed beside him, reading stories out loud like she used to when she was little. Her parents joined her, all three sitting quietly near the loyal dog who had changed their lives. When the afternoon sun streamed through the window, Guardian lifted his head one last time, looked at Emily, and gave a small sigh, soft and peaceful. The room fell silent. Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks as she buried her face in his fur. "Thank you," she whispered. "You'll always be my hero." In the days that followed, the family felt the emptiness deeply. The house seemed quieter without the sound of paws patting across the floor. Emily placed his red collar and medal in a small wooden box on her shelf, along with a picture of the two of them from the beach. Every night she would look at it before going to sleep and say, "Good night, guardian." One weekend, the family planted a small tree in their backyard in his memory. Emily tied his old red collar around the base and said softly, "This is for you, so everyone will remember what love looks like." As the tree grew, so did the lessons Guardian had left behind: kindness, courage, and loyalty. Years later, when Emily grew up and had children of her own, she would tell them stories about her brave dog. "He wasn't just a pet," she would say with a smile. "He was my guardian angel." Her children would listen with wide eyes, their faces glowing with wonder. And every time they visited their grandmother's house, they would run to the big tree in the backyard where a small metal tag still hung, engraved with the words "Guardian," the dog who never looked away. Sometimes, when the wind blew softly, the collar would jingle against the bark, almost like a faint whisper from the past, a reminder of the day a lonely stray dog found a little girl on a cold sidewalk and changed both of their lives forever. Emily would look at the tree and smile through tears. "You kept your promise, Guardian," she would whisper. "You saved me and you stayed with me, always." And though years had passed, she could still feel him in every quiet moment, in every gentle breeze, in every warm memory, because some bonds never fade, not even with time. Some say heroes wear medals, some say they wear uniforms. But in one small town, the greatest hero wore a red collar and had soft brown eyes that once saw a child in need and never walked away.